Hi, everybody. Glenn McGilvery, Managing Director of the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. Thanks for joining us today as we talk about hail for about the second time in a couple of weeks. And that for good reason. You may or may not have seen that CatIQ has released its preliminary estimate for the June 13 Southern Alberta event. We're currently looking at about 1.2 billion insured. That does not include claim adjustment expenses, which would add a substantial amount more on that. We'll see if that number goes up or down when the second update comes out. But needless to say, it was a very substantial event, and I think we kind of got that feeling within about an hour after its occurrence. We're very fortunate today to have two presenters with us. We're going to start with Vince Carrier. Vince is Special Projects Manager, and then Mark Okland. He's Product Development Manager for IKO. IKO is a shingle manufacturer with operations in the United States and Canada. And I'm going to hand it over to Vince and let him introduce himself and the company. Go ahead, Vince.
Excellent. Thank you, Glenn. Vince Carrier, as Glenn mentioned, Special Projects Manager for Canada with IKO. So just starting things off, let's start with a quick video here as to why we're all here. So as Glenn mentioned, it was a substantial event that happened here in Calgary, Alberta. And as IKO, we're very fortunate to have been reached out to from the ICLR, and we're very thankful for the opportunity to present to you today. So just moving right along here. So these slides are actually portioned together from LinkedIn, a slide sharing presentation that was done on Canada and climate change and what the expectations for the future might be. And these slides here, as scary as some of them might be, don't actually represent the majority of the storms since 2014. And as we all know, some of those have been the most extreme and most costly. So the wildfires, which, you know, in some instances, folks might say, well, you know, wildfires, what does that have to do with roofing? But it's interesting to note that the BC interior fires, they seemingly are becoming a regular occurrence. And so following several of those forest fires in the Kelowna area, certain areas of Kelowna and West Kelowna no longer are permitted to roof using wooden products such as cedar shake or cedar shingles. So that's always interesting. The 2011 tornado I believe this one hit Goderich, Ontario, relatively small in scale from a dollar perspective, $110 million in damage, but you know, can create a ton of damage around the surrounding area as well. So we'll talk a little bit further on that. The hurricanes, which seemingly they always seem to start, of course, down in the tropical areas and hit the eastern states of United States. And then, of course, they like to end off in Atlantic Canada, causing less destruction than what you would see in the U.S. states, but still some dramatic impacts there from a dollar perspective with the insurance agencies. Of course, flooding, and there's been substantial flooding incidences, especially throughout the prairie provinces over a number of years. And again, just to reiterate, these are only up to towards the end of 2013. So some substantial impacts, cost related there. So again, these types of losses expected to become more and more frequent, and that's really what this slide presentation was all about. But it doesn't actually capture a lot of the more costly events. So this is an interesting piece that I came upon when doing some of the homework for this. So between 2010 and 2017, AMA's vice president was actually interviewed. His name is Ted Koloff, and you know, $5 billion worth of insured damage to the province of Alberta just from summer storms, and that's July and August is what they're measuring in that area. That's a big number considering they're really only looking at wind, hail, and rain related. So not actually including tornadoes or anything along those lines, but 44 tornadoes touched down in the prairies each summer. And this number was kind of shocking to me. I never really thought of the prairies of having that many tornadoes that actually touched down. So that led to further research in finding that since 1980 to 2009, this was an astronomical number to me as to how many tornadoes actually hit. Now, further to that, looking at the Fujita scale, which you can see on the right-hand side here, you can see that some of these wind speeds, they get up there, you know, and so there's products out there that are manufactured by manufacturing of asphalt shingle roofs, as well as other composite roofing that can assist with some of the claims that would be wind-related. Now, of course, tornadoes cause absolute destruction in their wake, but there's outlying areas that are certainly affected by those wind speeds. So there's products out there that can help prevent some of those claims from happening. So now there's other extenuating circumstances that can come from some of these storms, which is why we're here today talking about something that is a potential option for homeowners and insurance companies to consider as a push, which would be a fortified asphalt shingle roof. So the Institute for Business and Home Safety, it's a nonprofit organization, and it's funded by the property insurance and reinsurance industry. And this is only out of the United States, but ICO has been working hand in hand with IBHS for quite some time, and Mark Okland, who's the next speaker, is the one who actually works with them directly. So you can see some of their work here, www.disastersafety.org, headquartered out of Tampa with a complete research facility in South Carolina. IBHS conducted research directed towards identifying how to mitigate property loss by examining how materials perform in extreme weather events. So done a ton of work, a ton of testing, and we're happy to be partnered with them in assisting helping with these natural hazards and creating products and actually producing products now that that can help mitigate some of these costs. This is a facility that was built in 2010, and it's part of the IBHS Research Center. And it's a total state-of-the-art research facility located about 90-acre parcel of land in Chester County, South Carolina. So these photos are actually compliments about IBHS. And this is actually a very large wind testing facility. So each one of those small circles that you see there is actually, I believe it's about a 6-foot fan. So pushing a ton of wind for testing materials. So here is a closer picture and an inside picture. So the structure is specially designed wind tunnel that is exceptionally large. So it's about 6 stories tall, and that last picture really didn't represent that well. 145 feet by 145 feet is the actual measurement of the facility itself. So large test chambers easily identified by its enormous wall of 105 fans, each nearly 6 feet in diameter and equipped with 350 horsepower engine. So very powerful. Together, the fans can replicate realistic weather conditions, including categories 1, 2, and 3 hurricanes, with winds up to 130 miles per hour. So extratropical windstorms, wind-driven rain conditions, and straight-line windstorms are things that might be tested in this facility. So full-scale buildings can be tested at various angles on the test chambers. And you can see that there's actually a small replicated house there with shingles applied to the roof decks to test for this specifically. So for wildfire-related testing, 7 ember generators to blow burning wood embers into the large test chamber. This can show where embers enter test structures and spread fire under realistic circumstances. The rain system in an array of mounted sprinklers that creates accurate and appropriate patterns for various sized rain droplets equivalent to the rainfall rate of up to 8 inches per hour. And in Alberta specifically, we can speak to the changes in the fire code with new construction, being that they're not allowed to actually put in ventilated soffit So, and that comes directly from some of these tests that were performed, not specifically with IBHS, but in other industries, other test facilities. So that was a massive change in the new construction industry in the code. So hail cannons can shoot realistic lab-created hailstorms at test structures in a large test chamber, which they have, recreating the effects more naturally of a hailstorm. The majority of building science focuses on brand new materials and systems and does not take into account decay and deterioration, unfortunately, caused by severe weather, UV exposure, temperature fluctuations. What you can see in the far right-hand background is actually a roof farm where they're actually weathering decks that are going to be used to assess the effects of natural aging. So this hail test itself, where they're firing off ice balls, is probably the most realistic that you'll find. And for that reason, ICO itself tests to something called FM Class 4. And we'll talk a little bit about that in future slides. So why fortified? Well, the best materials available, poorly installed, they're not going to meet satisfactory experiences. So fortified is defined enhanced application requirements and coupled those with a documentation and inspection program to promote proper installation. We've seen all too often when a quality roof product is improperly or poorly installed and it actually fails. So it may not have happened immediately, but it inevitably will fail. And to help mitigate this risk, our TSRs work with contractors to help them understand proper installation and the ramifications of improper application instructions. But it's great that an independent company like IBHS is out there providing these documentations to support the proper installation methods. So a fortified home evaluation is the foundation of the program itself. And the Fortified Home Evaluator has the important job of providing evaluation and verification services to property owners. Evaluators actually record detailed data about the home being considered for designation to facilitate a complete and accurate resilience analysis by the Fortified Home Administrator. If the analysis identifies that resilience upgrades are necessary to qualify for designation, in-progress inspections or documentation, including photos of those upgrades, are required. And finally, fortified home designations last for 5 years, and a home must have simplified designation evaluation performed every 5 years to keep its designation current. So that's important to note that, you know, it's not something that is just a one-shot and then done. It is something that requires redesignation because, again, as things age, they deteriorate. So these are the 3 designation levels for the fortified program itself. Starting off with fortified roof, moving to fortified silver, and of course, the top level being fortified gold. So this slide shows the components of each of those levels, and the presentation will focus only on the requirements of roof itself, fortified roof, not silver or gold. Slides going forward have some elements called out in yellow, which are items typically addressed by roofing contractors. Not all, but some. Note that just doing these things is not sufficient to achieve a roof hurricane designation. A home must have roof designation before it can obtain silver, and of course it must have silver before it can obtain gold. So it's a stepping, and if you will, think of it as a good, better, best scenario. So property losses resulting from storm events more often than not starts on the roof. And for that reason, the fortified program's first point of emphasis is the roof system. Not just the roof covering being the shingles, but the entire roof system. So this is not well understood by homeowners, so education is key. However, happy to say that the shingle manufacturing community has, in the last 5-10 years, maybe more, really shifted conversations to a system which is supported by our marketing departments variously. So each of these have wind zones that are highlighted here. So one, ASCE defines various areas of the buildings as zones 1, 2, and 3. The zones on the roof overhangs, ridges, and corners are shown up above, and they're highlighted as zone 3 in red. And the pressures and stresses experienced by portions of the structure vary for a given wind speed depending on the wind direction and the shape of the building, which to some might seem obvious, but to many will not be. And again, education is key on these things. So we want to stress on those areas that are red first, then of course orange, and then yellow. So the photo of storm damage illustrates that gable ends can be susceptible. One of the fortified roof requirements is to strengthen those gables. And there are sheeting and vent requirements, and framing outlookers, if present, must be reinforced. So this gable end here is sheeted with structural panels. So both gable end vents and gable rake venting allow for wind-driven water entry. So those have to be sealed off, and you can see that up in the up at the very peak there, that piece of OSB or plywood that's been applied. Several characteristics of roof deck sheeting that'll be recorded by the evaluator. Minimum roof sheeting thicknesses is a qualifying threshold condition for any of the fortified designations. In order to participate in the fortified hurricane program, the sheeting thickness must be a minimum of 7/16. Most manufacturers, it's duly noted that they're going to also mimic that same recommendations with 7/16 plywood or half-inch plywood. Deck material can be oriented strand board, being OSB, like we talked about earlier, plywood, or dimensional lumber. Other types of roof decking, like concrete or metal, can be encountered, but these are uncommon in a single-family home, duplex, or townhome. So the majority of conversation is going to be surrounding those plywood materials. The fasteners themselves, so these nails and this nailing pattern is adequate for all design wind speeds. So just running through this very quickly, because again, the fasteners are important. Ring shank nails are required. Full head, not clipped, and a minimum of 0.133 inch diameter, minimum 2 3/8 in length, and power-driven fasteners are okay, that's fine. They don't have to be hand-driven. Offset head for collating is okay, and spaced 6 inches on center. So unless the code or engineering requires closer. So as previously noted, zone 1 here we can talk about a little bit. ASCE defines various areas of the buildings as zones, as discussed. So if we look at these in zone 1, that's where the fastener spacing is 6 inches on center as recommended, as required. So the location being the interior of that roof area, or what we would call in the industry the field of the roof. So zone 2 being that orange area, it's going to be a requirement of 4 inches on center. So that's everywhere that roof edge within 4 feet of those gable ends or eave ends meet. And so nicely highlighted in orange there. And then of course, zone 3 being the corners are highlighted in red. Those are also going to be 4 inches on center. And sealing of the roof deck, one of the acceptable systems is a Code Plus requirement of the Fortified Home Program. Thus, most existing homes will not have a sealed roof deck system in place. So noting some of the Florida code here, Florida's OIR 1802 form accepts 2 of IBHS's sealed roof deck systems, taping the seams, fully adhered membranes. In the background, the term sealed roof deck is a fortified home term for systems that are applied to either the inside or the outside of the roof deck to seal the deck and keep water from entering the house through the seams in the roof deck sheeting. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. Previously, the terms secondary water barrier or secondary water resistance were commonly used and may still be in use in some areas. There's no technical difference between all of these terms. The term sealed roof deck was developed to avoid confusion, sometimes associated with the word secondary in the other terms. Some states have mitigation programs where the secondary terms are used, and in at least one state, the building code allows the use of the system that is not acceptable in the fortified home program. Therefore, it's imperative to understand the acceptable systems. Important to verify that both proper materials as well as the proper installation methods were used to seal the deck. That may require obtaining a roof compliance form from the property owners, the building roofing contractors. Blank compliance form letters are available through the evaluation software and from IBHS. But again, those are relative and specific to the US only at this point. So the four systems in there would be, number one, 4 inches wide modified bitumen tape applied to all seams. It's important to note that some manufacturers require the use of a suitable primer on the OSB when using these products. Number 2, fully adhered membrane. So check compatibility of the material with the roof deck being used is often something that the contractors will have to do as well. Point number 3, properly installed and qualified synthetic underlayment as described in the technical bulletin. And point number 4, double layer of 30-pound felt installed in accordance with the technical bulletin as described in the technical bulletin. So that's by manufacturer's recommendations as well. So again, important to note that this is a fortified system where we're actually developing a system that is more resilient to further damage to the roofing structure from natural hazards and big storms that we have here in Canada as well as the US. So again, just showing here that the double layer of 30-pound felt installed is in accordance with the technical bulletins or low slope guidelines as well. And really in our industry, we call that half lapping. For each of these methods, a clean, fully exposed roof deck is required. So, and again, most contractors are going to be doing that on a regular basis anyways. So that should not be of concern. I apologize, I just got to catch up here. So taping of the seams, and it's important to note that there are manufacturers such as ICO, we actually manufacture a product for taping of these seams. But option number 1 here is applying a compliant self-adhering polymer modified bitumen flashing tape at least 4 inches in width. And that's going to go directly to the roof deck itself, sealing all of those joints between the roof deck sheets. Option number 2 is applying for level 3 for exposure of up to 80 degrees Celsius. So that's going to be from a heat perspective. Compliant self-adhering flexible flashing tape at least 3 3/4 inches wide. And again, applied directly to that roof sheeting and deck. And here's a picture of the product after it's been applied. You can see on the left and the right hand sides there. So that's covering all of the joints between all of the sheeting. But important to note that another point of entry is right at the eave between where the sheeting meets the actual eave itself. So quite often framers are not the most skilled in framing of roofing. So we want to make sure that we cover up that area, which can lead to water penetration as well. So taping the seams, self-adhering polymer modified bitumen tape that is at least 4 inches as required by code, and 3 3/4 for those heat tapes, I should say. So a picture of the double lap or half lap felt there. You can see the installation of 30-pound felt. Alternatively to that, I believe ice and water, or what we'd call a self-adherent membrane at that eave, would also be acceptable. So full membrane peel and stick is also an option. So in our industry, we refer to that as ice and water. So peel and stick over the entire roof deck. So you must install a layer of 15-pound felt as a bond break to prevent shingles from sticking to the fully adhered membrane. And this felt can be just tacked down with a regular stapler. not a concern there. It's really just so that the seals themselves, the shingles themselves don't seal directly to that ice and water membrane, because that is going to be a permanent seal down. Again, here's a half-lapped picture showing 19 inches on center for felt, if that is the way that that they're going. And again, an example of a sealed roof deck. And again, here at the very eave, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. This is the section I was referring to earlier where the roof deck meets the fascia. And that would be another area that we would look to have that sealant tape applied as a possible penetration point. So fortified roof system drip edge. So a minimum 3-inch overlap of drip edge material. Drip edge must extend 1/2 inch below the sheeting and 2 inches back from the roof deck. Must be attached to the roof deck with fasteners at 4 inches on center. So to comply with the IRC, starter strip shingles are nailed to the eave edge and optionally also on the rake edge for improved wind resistance. Although nailed on, there's still potential for wind to start uplift action on the perimeter. Fortified calls for the starters to be fully adhered. And it's interesting to note that only in the last year or so, these products have been made available. ICO is one of those manufacturers that manufactures a peel and stick starter shingle itself. So it makes for a lot less mess. And you'll see a picture of some sealant being applied here in future slides. Adhesion at perimeter area is key. So to prevent lifting at those shingles, those edges, as you've seen in previous slides with the red area and the orange areas, that's really what we're looking to prevent. So the use of a roofing cement or a caulking is what they're referring to here. And that's, again, peel and stick starter shingles can replace that requirement. So the eave drip edge must be installed on top of the underlayment. So starter strip options would be nail-on starter, a wide compatible adhesive, and self-adhesive starter. The rake edges must have drip edge installed on top of the underlayment. Starter strip options there would be, again, nail-on starter, set in 8 inches of compatible adhesive or self-adhesive starter, and each shingle set in 8 inches of compatible adhesive. So, and this is that shot I was referring to, and this is the adhesive being applied at the eave and at the starter, and you can see how messy that quite possibly could be. So that's where, as a manufacturer, we look to those opportunities to develop products like, Edge Seal or Gold Seam to fill those voids and make the contractor's jobs a lot better, and make the system an improved system for prevention. So once there's reinforced gables, firmly attached and sealed roof deck perimeters are sealed, and the shingles must comply with wind resistance standards. And this is the standard we're referring to here. So there's 2 of them. So using shingles classified as Class F, ASTM D3161, and or Class H, ASTM D7158. Class F being the standard entry-level wind rating that's out there, Class H being what we know in our industry to be a high wind classification. So Class F is a maximum of 110 mile/hour winds is what it's tested to, or 177 kilometers per hour. And when you talk about Class H, that's where you're getting into the 150 mile/hour ratings, so or 210 kilometers per hour. Remaining requirements for a fortified roof is the ventilation. So ridge vents and off-ridge vents must pass Florida Building Code testing application standards, specific testing standards there. Testing application standard is known as TAS 100A, a test procedure for wind and wind-driven rains. So ridge vents with a lip or a baffle on the roof surface side, or they're also more resistant to water intrusion. So look for vents that meet TAS 100A. And again, that's a requirement down in the Florida. And we reference Florida a lot because they've got some of the strictest codes with respects to wind. So you may be familiar with the term called Miami-Dade. So that's out of the Florida area. And there's a lot of reference to that, even within Canada. Of the utmost importance is documentation, so which must provide the proof and the required products were used and often assure they were installed correctly. And that's on all fortified requirements being met. So I can't overemphasize the importance of complete documentation. In this circumstance, without it, designations cannot be awarded. And Mark's going to speak to some of the benefits of having that fortified system from a U.S. perspective that maybe we can look to adapt, and adopt into the Canadian cultures of building and re-roofing. So documentation is the responsibility of the evaluator, and frequently the evaluator they'll enlist the assistance of the installing contractors to take pictures and secure copies of specification sheets and test reports that identify the standards used to test the product. So thus assuring that the product meets the fortified requirements. So IBHS also requires evaluations for roof installed after December 5th, 2016. This is really just a boilerplate slide for this presentation, not something that really needs to be covered here. So, and on that note, we'll pass this over to Mark so that he can speak more to some of the science and benefits behind a resilient roof system.
Great, thanks, Vince. Everyone can hear me okay?
Mark, you might still be muted. I heard you.
Did you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, great. So I wanted to thank everybody once again for taking the time to be on this call, and we wanted to talk a little bit about tying everything in together. And we're talking a lot about Fortify. We're talking a lot about there's products and there's installation, and how it's so important for the two to be. Both of them need to be part of the process. And so when I look at the stakeholders involved here, there's homeowners, there's roofing contractors, there's roofing manufacturers like ICO and others, there's organizations like ICLR, IBHS, there's insurance companies, there's the federal government, there's states, provinces, and cities all involved that can help from the promotion standpoint and educating the really the homeowner or the businesses to pay more attention to their roof, so that basically the investments you make on the front end will help on the back end to prevent a lot of catastrophic costs or significant damage to the roof structure or to the house or the building structure in general. So that's what we want to do, is make sure there's an education and really focus on the importance of a strong roof system and a strong structural system to prevent unnecessary costs and other inconveniences in the future. So I'll go into the performance and why we feel that as a manufacturer. What Vince touched on a little bit earlier was we need not only do we have to have the right installation, but we really are coming up with, you're seeing better products being produced as well. And so those two together work really well together. So my job in product development is to help come up with these products that are easier to install and also perform better on the roof. So Vince, if you want to move to the next one. So the key here is, and when Vince kind of touched on it earlier in the presentation, storm activity is on the rise. I don't think it appears to be on the rise, it is on the rise. And we talk about climate change increasing and everything of that nature. Studies are, there's different studies, the 3M does it every year, about the number of wind-related events. And that's one thing that we can talk about. And what IBHS is, there's initially probably focused on the coastlines, the hurricanes, and that type of thing. But when you look at, and we'll see a slide coming up here pretty soon, but when you look at what happens, wind is really the culprit. Wind is it happens everywhere across North America. And so you don't have to be near a coastline. It could be related to a tornado as Vince mentioned earlier, it could be related to just a very heavy, strong, significant thunderstorm or straight line winds. Those are the things you have to keep in mind, is that winds are everywhere across North America. You know, next one. And so again, there's more evidence that this is happening across, you know, the globe, but the bottom line is there's just more severe weather. And I know that on the call a couple weeks ago, I think Ian was talking about, you know, this is something that we just have to do something about ahead of time, be proactive, so that we don't have these events that we know are going to happen, cause what I would say would be unnecessary damage to the structure. Okay. And again, not all roofs perform the same. You know, there's different parts, and there's different climates that we're dealing with. Obviously, the northern part of Canada versus, let's say, Miami, Florida, there's going to be different weather events there. But again, wind is the common culprit there. But then you look at, like as I mentioned earlier, about performance and products. There's two layers, and Vince touched on it also in his part of the presentation. There's the top layer, you know, in this case, the shingles, or roofing material, and then there's the below the shingles, everything you do from the structure up to where the shingle is installed. All of those things play a part, an important part, in making sure that everything, you know, stays intact during a significant weather event, particularly wind. And so in here you've got the makeup, I guess, of a fiberglass asphalt shingle, where you have a fiberglass mat, you've got the sealant, you have the coating, which are the granules, and then you have, in this case, this is an example of a product that's, I believe, really helped revolutionize the industry by offering a product that has a nailing zone that's reinforced. So what that means is that shingle will stay on the roof, and if it does, something does happen above and beyond, whatever the case might be, again, we talk about what happens below the shingle as being the secondary protection against water infiltration caused by wind. So this is the makeup of the shingle. So we'll get to the next slide. So you talk about all the different features that, generally speaking, all roofing manufacturers have. There are some that have better nailing holding power than others, which is, I believe, very important. You have the sealant, but you also have the ability to keep that shingle in place with proper nailing. And when we go on, if a roofing manufacturer goes on a claim when there's a windstorm, for example, whether it's the US or I'm down here in Chicago, or it could be up in Canada, I think Vince would back me up on this. Majority of the time, if there's a blow off, it's going to be because of the improper installation. So we really want to make sure that the product is installed. They do everything they can to keep the structure as secure as possible. And that's where we need the help, maybe of the folks on this call, to help keep promoting that to the homeowner, why it's better to spend a little bit more money and effort to have a better roof system overall. Okay, next. So vertical integration we're a family-owned company. We're based out of Toronto, but in general, the key is vertical integration for us is we control all aspects of the raw materials that go into our products, and that's a huge thing for our family owners and the quality and the consistency of our products. So I'm not going to do an ICO commercial, but this is why we do what we do, is because we want to make sure that we are putting the best raw materials into our products. So asphalt, can be modified. We modify our asphalt at our plants all across North America. It doesn't seem like a lot, but if anyone's ever been to a roofing plant or a roofing tour, it is interesting. I hear a lot from customers that go on these tours that they weren't expecting to see what they saw, but there's a lot that goes on to create a shingle, and there's a lot of technology involved to make sure that shingle performs as well as it needs to be, as we say at the bottom there, one of the heaviest in the industry as far as the shingle goes, but also one of the better roofing manufacturers. So we have products that really do perform, and it's not just ICO, but we take a lot of pride in the fact that we have these products performing well when they get installed on a roof. So we have our own quarries. We crush our own rock to make granules. That brings out the color in the shingles. So again, it's a vertical integration aspect of it to the company. So we talk about mining, when you see that picture down there, it's not as prominent as it used to be, but if you see houses, and you've probably all seen houses that look like this with the blue-green algae stains, they're typically older roofs, but we do add our copper granules into the blend of granules for our shingles to prevent this from happening. It's aesthetically, it's not good, and it will have an impact on the life of the roof. So we really want to make sure that it has the AR granules, algae resistant granules in there, so you don't have a roof that looks like that. So that's something that's been much more common in the last, I would say 10 years or more, but we have it in our shingles for sure. And then we talked about the holding power. Nailing is so important. You make it easier for the contractor to nail the shingle properly, and then you reinforce it with some type of a reinforcement so that the shingle stays on the roof. That's really what you want to do. Nobody, whether it's an insurance claim, whether it's a contractor, nobody or manufacturer, like for Vince and myself, we don't want to go out and onto a claim if it can be avoided. So the point here really of this whole call is there some things that you can do to make sure that the claims are reduced going forward so that you have the roof properly installed to begin with. Okay. And I can talk through this. This is just this gives you an idea. On the left side is a standard shingle, and the right is a shingle that has Armor Zone technology, which has that reinforced nailing zone. As I mentioned, you can see the nail takes a lot longer to pull through. It doesn't even pull through at the end. So that's just telling you that it gives the contractor, the homeowner, peace of mind that when the roof is installed correctly, it should perform better. Again, that goes back to better performing products and a better installation. And then sealant, in my opinion, sealant is the secondary part of a shingle, but it's certainly important. You want to make sure that the shingle seals down. Obviously, we all know that sometimes weather doesn't cooperate. If it's colder weather, particularly up in Canada, we don't maybe see it as much down in let's say Miami. Again, I'll use that as an example. But the reality is, sealant does need time to activate. And so that's why proper nailing the focus has always been on proper nailing, but we have to have a strong sealant as well to keep that shingle in place. Now this is a Miami-Dade wind test that was performed, and you can see there that I believe this was upwards of 155 miles per hour. So it just shows you how that's, you start getting that kind of wind and you're worried about the structure, not so much the roof. And if the roof can handle it, the structure should be able to handle. And that's something that we talked about with the FORTIFIED system, is that it really takes the structure from the ground up. Obviously, we're talking, ICO sells roofing products, but this roof is a very important, really key part of the overall protection of what's inside the house structure. Obviously, if there's a wind, and when you see wind, and you saw some of those pictures earlier, water gets inside your structure. We want to prevent the water from getting inside and causing the damage. So there's two products that in our world fit the performance category. Dynasty and Nordic both have that reinforced nailing zone called Armor Zone, but the Nordic is the one that I would say should be really looked at when you get into the situation like what we're having in the Calgary, Alberta area, because now we're addressing not just wind, but wind and hail, because it has a polymer modified asphalt component to it that helps prevent, it's hail resistant. And you saw some of the videos earlier that Vince showed of how our products are tested against wind, against hail. And these are just the feature differences between the two performance products. And again, they all have the high definition colors. Homeowners are very particular about their colors. The days of just having a couple color offerings are over. There's more choices out there. There's strong warranties in place, but then you look at the difference, really Nordic at the end there, the polymer modified asphalt, and then the Class 4 impact resistance rating, which we'll talk about here coming up. There's especially what IBHS has been doing with their with the testing on Class 4. Again, Dynasty with the Armor Zone is up to 130 miles per hour or 210 kilometers, and has the colors as well, 15 high dimension, high def colors. Nordic has less colors, but not too many less, but it really is a nice, probably our best product that we offer overall, because it has all the features you're looking for, especially in a high wind or a high potential hail zone area. And here's some testing being done with an ice cannon, showing the product holding up to simulation of ice or hailstones. I'm sorry. And so there's the key there is you look at what it does to the top of the shingle, what it does to the behind the shingle. But what I like about what IBHS is doing with their testing is they're focusing on the really the top of the shingle and what happens as far as the dents and that type of thing. So there, you really want to make sure that the product can withstand, as much of the damage of wind as possible and hail. And so that's why performance products are even more important now than ever before, as we talked about earlier with wind and climate weather getting more severe as we get every single year. And this is actually right off the IBHS website, which is the roof shingle hail impact ratings. You see a number of manufacturers that are on there, and really everything with the green good overall rating is a shingle that can be used as part of the hail wind fortified system that Vince was talking about earlier. And you can see ICO there with the green rating. And so it's just, these are all manufacturers. ICO, I believe, is the only one on this list that is Canadian based, but the idea is that we went through some rigorous testing, and I believe that if I were to guess, when you look at what IBHS has done with this, you look at what FM is doing and what UL is doing, that the testing that IBHS has come up with, to me, makes the most sense. Again, that's a personal opinion, but it's more realistic, let's put it that way. So what you really want is to have a shingle that hits the green, and that's going to allow you to use those shingles, as part of a fortified system with hail and wind. Now, what I mentioned earlier about the key stakeholders that are involved, and I mentioned homeowners and contractors, manufacturers, organizations like ourselves, insurance companies, federal government. Then you talk about, we can drill all the way down here to the fact that there's extreme weather is everywhere, and Roy Wright talks about this in an article that just came out, I think it was July 3rd, about how a homeowner experienced roof damage and leaks after a storm, and he noticed the new neighbor's roof was unharmed by the storm. This is one that talks about. I'm sure there are two different things. There's one article by Roy, and the other one is another video that we've put together that talks about the value of when you see a house that has got this type of roof structure on it versus a one that didn't have a Class 4 shingle, what happens. So we can show the video right now if you want, Vince. Maybe just a little bit of it.
For us, we approach each installation with a custom system that's designed to perform, and that's why we partnered with ICO to be able to deliver their systems to the consumer. My name is Warren McGrew. I'm the owner and founder of Sparrow Exteriors. We service Greater Atlanta, both residential and commercial. We're about delivering quality installation, quality materials. We want to make sure that we're committed to excellence.
My name is Frank Hardy, Colonel, United States Air Force retired. We had a pretty heavy storm and it lifted up the shingles.
We had replaced his neighbor's roof about 3 houses down before due to storm damage, and that homeowner had chosen ICO's Nordic shingle. And then just a few weeks later, a severe storm hit the area. The neighbor's roof held up great, but his started experiencing leaks.
We woke up with water in our living room. We had leaks in both ends of the house.
So this is what we're trying to, as a collectively, I believe, with all the stakeholders involved, get across, is that you do some things on the front end that'll prevent the risk that you'll get in the backside of it in terms of claims, roof blow-offs, water infiltration, that type of thing. So that was what I want to talk about with this slide, is that there's a IBHS, in this case Roy's building a case for that. And then insurance companies are certainly buying into this from that perspective, and certainly contractors and homeowners are buying into this because it gives them the peace of mind. So this just gives you, I want to throw this slide up there. This is from a 3M, but it's FW Dodge, I'm sorry. But this is a slide that 3M does analysis every year of weather events and what's going on with the industry, roofing industry in particular. In this case, you can see fairly consistently over the last, how many years, going back to '86, that there's the average lifespan or time a roof is replaced is about 19 years. So this is something that no matter what you deal with, there's going to be a replacement within usually within 20 years. So it's an investment that you need to. It's a long-term investment you should make. And here's where I got my slides mixed up, but this was the Fort Collins slide that I started to talk about earlier, where when you talk about the stakeholders, this is actually a city that has gone to the extent of requiring that new asphalt shingles and even roof coverings are using a Class 4 impact resistant shingle. Now they call out UL 2218, but when you look at FM 4473, you can look at what IBHS is doing. Basically, it's just a Class 4 impact resistant shingle. So Nordic, in this example, is being used quite a bit in the Fort Collins area because of this. It happened about a year and a half ago, back in January of 2019. So this is really, it's all residential installation. So this really shows you that not only the federal government can be involved, or a state or a province, but in this case, a city down to the city level can get involved to help provide a more resilient roof system in their community. And this talks a little bit more about the re-roof requirements in Fort Collins as well. So again, it's been we're trying to use this as an example of what other communities can do. Not the state, not just the federal, but just the other local communities can adopt this as well. And this just gives you an idea. Again, this is the State Farm down in the States, and you look at the roofing materials, but you can see Alberta does show up on the list there of states or provinces that are eligible for discounts, in their by using these types of shingles. So this gives you an idea that, again, the insurance companies play a part in this. There's incentives if the homeowner wants to have a shingle installed, because oftentimes if they go for just a replacement, a Class 4 shingle will be more money, so they're going to have to pay that out of their pocket. But the idea is they're paying out of their pocket, but it's heavily subsidized, and they are at the end of the day, in the long run, they're definitely getting their money's worth, because they're not having the risk associated with the blow off down the road or hail impact that can cause water infiltration. Now, this is the example of states supporting resilience across the U.S. There's 3 states that we've called out here on this slide: Alabama, North Carolina, and Connecticut. 3 different ways of doing it, but just as an example, because we're running out of time, it gives you an idea that that states are involved as well. And one thing I'll say about Alabama is they will, with you talk about a discount of up to 35% on the wind portion of the insurance premium. That is a major cost savings for the homeowners. So there's an example of a state with their Strengthen Alabama Homes program that really does support IBHS fortified standards, and it's not a coincidence that they have a lot of installations down in that state, and have done a great job with supporting this program. Okay, next, Vince. And this is another example of how homeowners, when you think about it, they can actually, why would they spend the time and money to get a fortified system or spend more time to get a better products, better installation? It's really, studies have shown it can add nearly 7% to the value of the home. Now, 7% of the value of the home is certainly, you're getting more than your money's worth in terms of what the cost is on the front end. You're getting much more value on the backside with the value of their home going up. So there's another example of where we can convince a homeowner, help promote this to homeowners and to contractors. Okay.
Mark, I apologize. It does not want to forward.
Oh.
There we go.
Okay. And so again, we're getting toward the end here before we open it up to some questions. But there's other programs as well that support the resilience efforts that we're talking about in this call today. There's the HERO program, which is a federal government program, and there's also the PACE program, which is really a financial tool where you can actually tie in the extra cost of getting a roof system, enhanced roof system, into your property tax bill. And one thing I was talking to Vince about before the call, I didn't realize that Canada has the PACE program as well. I'm only familiar with it in the U.S. It's not as widespread as we would like it to be, but I believe other municipalities are starting to look into this more heavily. Again, anything we can do to help provide this idea that, okay, spending a little bit more money up front, it will pay off at the end. And if homeowners can get this extra relief or extra, allow this to be done, I think that will be better for the overall industry in the long run. But it's good to hear that Canada has this program also in place. So next one, if it works. I think we're getting to the end. Oh, how about that?
We are at the end. I apologize. For the last couple of slides, it just didn't want to move.
Well, it's technology, but that just gives you an overall view of of what we want to talk about today. And we ended pretty much to the time we were expecting, just before the 2 o'clock hour Eastern time. And I guess we do have some questions that we should address. It looks like you're already getting into that, Vince?
Yeah, there are a few questions on here. So Tracy, must roof installers be pre-certified to install this particular type of shingle in order to obtain the fortified designation? So I'll let you touch on that, Mark.
Yeah, they are, so to be part of the fortified system or they're gonna, that goes back to what you talked about earlier, Vince, with the designation. You do have to go through, there's training involved, and you do have to have that that to be able to offer that. So I think we've got Tanya on the line from IBHS, but I do know that this is not just for everybody. You have to have gone through the training process to get that done.
So, and again, just for everybody's knowledge, the IBHS fortified system at this point is specific to the U.S. So, second question here, Daryl. is the Class 4 designation a FM classification or UL, or are they the same? And so they both test differently to meet a Class 4 designation. They're both independent testing firms. The testing methods are a little bit different. So the video you watched with respects to a cannon shooting an ice ball, that probably mimics very close, if not closest, to what IBHS test systems are for hail resistance and resiliency. And that's what we test to at ICO, is the FM classification to meet that Class 4 impact rating. The UL testing is actually a vertical drop of a steel ball onto the shingle. So a little bit different, and from our argument standpoint, I would say maybe not as realistic as what firing an ice ball at the product would be in consideration of hail being an ice ball itself. So hopefully that answers the question. And next question, can you discuss copper coating? How, and does all your brands have it? All of our laminate products, as well as our singular 3-tab product that we still manufacture, do have algae-resistant copper-coated granules in the product. So, and we do offer a 10-year warranty on the algae resistance. So yes. Zara asks, have you also looked at reflective materials, cool roofs for asphalt shingles to improve the energy performance of the residential housing as well? So Mark, why don't you speak to that?
Yes, and we have, and we already have products in the market right now, both primarily in California rather, but along the West Coast for sure, through the Cool Roof CRRC and the Cool Roof Initiative that's out there. We do also offer these roofs in the Toronto area, because there are some codes, and again, a lot of these things are driven by codes, especially when you get into reflective roofs or cool roofs, and codes, requirements, that type of thing. So we do have a presence in Canada with this as well, but it's mainly in the California market, and I want to say we have somewhere around 6 to 8 colors available, and some of them are lighter, but we also have some darker colors because, again, we talked earlier about the preference of homeowners to like darker colors, and so we do have a nice array of colors available.
In Canada, that is growing, especially in the GTA marketplace. They're looking at solar reflectance as a requirement. There's certain requirements that have to be met in that marketplace, so important to know that as well. Zara asks, we have a project looking at the energy performance of typical residential roofing assemblies in Canada. Vince mentioned the ridge ventilation and soffit airflow that may affect the performance. Can you elaborate more? Oh boy, ventilation is a very hot topic, and a very controversial one at that. So yeah, unfortunately within the Alberta region, what I was speaking to specifically, fire codes have changed for new construction because of zero lot line builds. And so what they found through testing is that if the adjacent building has a fire, that the soffit, the way that ventilation is designed, is to draw in cooler air and expel hot air out of the top. And what they found is that some of the embers were actually being sucked into the attic and starting fires within the attic adjacent buildings. So within Alberta specifically, because of zero lot line builds, they've changed that code so that there's no new construction that build with a ventilated soffit to prevent that. That absolutely it's going to lead to performance issues from a standpoint of how the product roofing will perform in general. It's still going to do its job from a water shedding standpoint, but you're essentially, if you don't allow proper ventilation, you end up cooking the roof itself. So it will pre-age, and that means light oils are actually going to be evaporating quicker than what they should be, aging the roof quicker than what it should, and that will lead to performance issues down the road. I can't say from a scientific standpoint, how long that's going to be. I hope that answers your questions. From an energy performance standpoint, I think the SRI ratings might be more in line with what you're looking for, but if not, please ask further. An anonymous attendee, why is the tiered approach to the certification needed? Why couldn't one skip to silver or right to gold? Mark, you're extremely familiar with the IBH system, having been involved with them. So why don't you touch on that?
Well, extremely might be an extreme word, but I'm familiar with, and all I can say to this is that it's it's done for a reason to have it tiered as Vince talked about, with the roof starting off as being the first aspect of it, and then going further on. There are different. The important thing that I would take away from this is that what they're asking for from a requirement standpoint is very stringent, even with starting with the roof, fortified roof. And so that's why I think you go from there further on. I don't know if you want to go back to that slide or not, Vince. I don't know. I
Sorry,
flying
which
blind
slide?
a little bit. It was earlier in the presentation when you had all three of the, I think, the designations. You had roof,
Sure.
and you had silver, and
Sure.
and again, I don't know if we want to.
Well, if it wants to actually,
It wants.
there we go.
I'm seeing something pop up.
The other way of looking at it would be as a good, better, best scenario. So no different than when you're building up a roof system from the eave. Felt is, by building code standards, perfectly acceptable. Why is it not forwarding? Our recommendation is always to move to the best product available, which would be an ice and water product. So you can look at it as a good, better, best. And in order to get to the best, you have to build the good system.
I think for the fairness of those on the call and the fact that this is I think I'm seeing your part of your other screen there, but we can follow up with everybody on that at the.
Is this the screen you were talking about?
Yeah, I'm having some trouble opening it. Oh, here it is. So, as you can see, when you get to silver and gold, it gets into more different, looks like different products and structures. So my knowledge is primarily with fortified roof, because that's what you have to start with that, and that's where it goes. And there's two versions of that. There's hurricane, and then there's also high wind and hail when you get more inland. So I do not have as good of strong knowledge of the other two fortified levels as I probably should. So if we need to follow back up on that, we can get that information maybe out to the group.
It's Glenn McGilvery here from ICLR. We're fortunate to have Tanya Brown-Giamenko on the line as well, and I'm going to allow her to talk.
Sure.
And I don't know if Tanya has something she wants to add. Go ahead, Tanya.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So really, the fortified roof approach is to statistically tackle the things that are most likely to cause problems. So when you think about any significant weather event, from a statistical standpoint, you're more likely to get lower end category events. So our fortified roof program at that level is focused very much on the roof covering, keeping the roof together. That's statistically the most likely thing to fail in a hail event or a high wind hurricane event. As you move to silver, we're basically adding into the next highest statistical chances of getting damage. So we're really taking the approach that you're more likely to have lower end events. So let's tackle the lower end events. And then as you're willing and able to move up, we'll start tackling the less frequent events, but that are more severe and damaging.
Do you know what the breakdown is, Tanya, for like the number of fortified roof designations versus the silver and the gold, if you had to break it down?
I know silver is the lowest by far. Most everything is in roof or gold. I actually think our highest stats are in gold now because of the Alabama program, that there's so much emphasis on new builds that all of the builders along the coast in a new build sense are doing fortified gold. So I actually think we're getting our biggest numbers out of that. But silver is definitely lowest, and I think gold is highest.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, Tanya, sorry, it's Vince with ICO. So fortified roof is really essentially starting with the roof, and as you move up through, it tackles the other areas of the complete building. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct. And again, that's because studies have shown that in significant events of all kinds, the roof is the first thing to have problems. So we're going to tackle that first.
Excellent.
Thank you for bailing me out, Tanya.
No problem.
Yes, appreciate it.
No problem.
So we do have another question here. Who determines which of the fortified levels will need to be achieved, and are the requirements listed under each level of the fortified system the only ones that will be looked at?
You want me to go again?
I think that's a good idea.
I would love that, Tanya.
Okay, no problem. So the fortified, which level you go into fortified is usually the building owner's choice. Although, you know, if you're trying to go for a discount or you're trying to go with some of the programs in Alabama, it may be somebody else that's dictating the level. But generally speaking, if you're an average homeowner and you say, you know, I want to or I can afford to go up to this level, it's you making the choice. The requirements that are looked at, if you're going for silver, we're going to look for silver, and we're going to look for the roof requirements. If you're going for gold, we're looking for all three set of requirements.
Okay, excellent. So this may actually go back to you as well, Tanya, but it was covered within the presentation. So perhaps I missed this, having some connectivity issues here. Does your system or program offer a fortified flashing component to it, something above the current market product installation process, or is this not a top priority reported with severe weather events?
So our fortified roof requirements require the use of a drip edge flashing at the eave and rakes, and it has to be a certain gauge, and the nail spacing has to be a certain distance. But I think in regards to other parts of flashing, like if you were flashing in different roof levels or a dormer or a place where you had a wall adjacent to a roof, I don't think we do anything different there other than what's required by code. I'm not the super fortified expert, but I think those are pretty standard. It's the edge details on the roof itself that we really focus on for flashing.
I think we always refer to local building codes and or manufacturer installation instructions.
Hi, so Glenn McGovern again. What I'd like to do, if Paul Kovacs is on the line, Paul, if you'd like to go off mute and ask your questions, the questions that you provided in the chat box have disappeared, but I know you had a few things that you wanted to touch on. Can you come off of mute, Paul?
Thank you, Glenn. Wonderful presentation, extremely helpful, advancing the conversation in Canada and talking about how we can do much, much better. A quick question about Fort Collins. Vince, do you think Fort Collins would be a good program in Calgary?
Nothing like putting a guy on the spot, eh, Paul? Yeah, of course. I think, you know, anytime that we can push to have a better system in place that's going to lead to savings overall, I think is a good idea, absolutely. And in the situation that we're in right now with the $1 billion hailstorm plus, and I think it was covered a couple of weeks back in the call, you know, anything within that ground zero, yeah, we all understand that with a hail impact like what we had, it's going to be extensive damage. But the outlying areas of that storm is where the potential savings really are. So I think it would be a worthwhile effort and venture for sure.
Again, it's Paul. The focus in a number of states has been on Fortified as the program to certify that a really comprehensive approach has been taken to the roof, but also to the entire building. And Fortified is the technique that is tied back to insurance and the proven technique used in a number of states. The Fort Collins approach did not go as far as Fortified. It talked about just the roof and the commitment to the Class 4 shingles. How much of the gain from the Fortified roof program comes just by getting the right shingles, by doing, getting that step right? How much of the progress can you make there?
Want me to take that, Vince, or do you want to?
Yeah, no, please. I'm just going to get to that particular slide. So go ahead.
Well, again, I think what I talked about earlier, what we both talked about, is there's the shingle, and that's one of the four things that we focus on when we're talking about a fortified, or what I would call a Code Plus application, a roof system. And it's the shingles are the kind of the last part, the securing the edges of perimeter, what Tanya talked about, sealing the roof deck and fastening the deck. So I think as a manufacturer, we as I talked about earlier, we go out and on a lot of, not a lot, but we go on claims, and you see that the issue is usually the installation. So having a shingle that performs very well or better is very important, whether it's a wider nailing zone, easier to install, and stays on the roof better. That's so important. But what we always talk about, and we don't want to talk about it, but we do talk about it, or we should talk about it, is that if something were to happen, you've seen the videos, we showed them earlier today on the call, that if something were to happen with that shingle, you've got that secondary protection area, and that's all the things you're doing under the fortified system. So I don't know what the actual breakdown would be. Certainly, the shingle is in the normal code installation is certainly better than a standard shingle in code installation. But we really would love to see Fort Collins, go maybe one step further. I think Tanya would agree. We've had a lot more success with IBHS Fortified in the southeast and the south, and we're trying to do more across North America. And this might be a case where we could maybe, I don't know, I could work with Fred and Mark to work on this. But I think that's a start. But we have so many contractors that just aren't doing even the Class 4 shingle. We got to start somewhere. So I would say that's a great start, but it's certainly much. I think it helps a lot more to have the other components of Fortified involved. Hope that answers your question.
That was really helpful. Yeah, and again, the spirit of my understanding is we had a series of terrible hurricanes driving a conversation that led to the very exciting Fortified program with an emphasis on wind. And today in our conversation about resilient roofs, we've focused on wind because that's a national North American problem. It's in all communities. But adding the extra hail dimension is a little more focused in terms of the areas where hail comes in. And trying to get progress on the hail part has its own specific dimensions. So just getting the right shingle is a step forward. And if we can respond to Calgary and get in Class 4 shingles, that sounds like a step forward. But I think it'll take a while to get a comprehensive approach to wind and hail in place. Anyway, thanks for sharing that. I think we can learn from Fort Collins and do better. But that's it from me, Glenn. Thank you for the opportunity to ask some questions and share some views.
All right, Glenn, if I could, there appears to be another question here. Once Fortified certification is applied, it remains eligible for 5 years. But if IBHS Fortified comes up with some significant changes in their code within this 5-year time range, does the owner need to install that modification immediately?
I believe the answer is no, but if Tanya wants to correct me, because I think if
that's correct. You're grandfathered in under the old way. If your 5 years is up and you want to redesignate, you would need to do the new thing. But no, if we change something in the interim, you don't have to change.
That makes sense, that it would come up in the next inspection, right? Am I correct in assuming that, based on this presentation, Tanya, that it's at the 5-year period where there's a re-inspection process?
Yes, that's correct. And we do that because we know things change over time, and you could have been affected by a significant event, or you could have some, maintenance issue, or anything could have happened in 5 years. So we do want to come back and check it to make sure everything's still good. And if not, to go ahead and get those things remedied to get the protection that people think they're getting.
Okay, and so to further on that last question, if there were changes, it would be brought to the homeowner's attention at that time. Is that correct?
Yes, if they were seeking a redesignation, that's when they would. get that information and want to implement it if they did want to redesignate.
So Glenn McGovern here. The obvious question that's going to come up is cost. So if you're replacing a, say, class 1 or 2 shingle roof with a class 4, say in Alberta, what will that cost in round figures?
Yeah, and that's a very fair question, and we've been over this before. And from previous calls, what I did is I reached out to one of our top contractors that does replacement and new construction work in both Alberta and Saskatchewan, primarily in Alberta. And so I asked that question on the same roof, on the same home, if they were to go from a Cambridge or an entry-level laminate shingle to a more premium class 4 impact rated product like a Nordic, what would that cost difference implication be? And their response was very reasonable. He said an exact number of 26%, but I think it would be fair to say that you're going to find some guys that are going to be a little bit more expensive, some guys a little bit cheaper, maybe less expensive. So somewhere in the ballpark of 20 to 30% is I think a reasonable ballpark to talk about.
Great, thanks. And in my experience, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding surrounding the warranty versus the resilience of a product. So a company may say, oh, I have a 25-year shingle, or I have a 20-year shingle, or whatever. That does not equate to resilience. I wonder if you can comment on that.
Absolutely. It's probably one of the number one questions we get in our industry, especially from homeowners. So the warranties for all manufacturers of asphalt related roofing products is the same in that it's against manufacturing defects. So we're warranting the product against it being manufactured incorrectly. And there's a lot of folks and misperception out there, and some of it's related to how they were sold on the product from, possibly a distributor or a contractor. But regardless of how there is that misperception, there is a misperception that, the warranty represents the life cycle of the product. And that would be a fallacy.
The other thing I hear a lot about is in order to have a resilient roof, it has to be something other than asphalt. And certainly that's not true, but I wonder if you can speak to that. I mean, the way I look at it, I think something like 95% of all homes in Canada are covered with asphalt. And I think we have to work with those parameters in order to have success with impact resilience. But the question, why asphalt? How would you answer that?
So, yeah, it's interesting. We have another AIA presentation that I did only a few weeks back, which addressed that very question. And there's a lot of products out there. You've got concrete tile, you've got clay tile, you've got synthetic roofs. So the question, very simply, why asphalt? It is the most economical system and most effective system to watershed your home.
Right. The other part about it, this is something I don't think we talked nearly enough about, and that's the environmental impact of having to rip a roof off a home and throw it into a landfill in order to replace it after a hailstorm. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually covered in a previous presentation as well. So there's upwards of 15% allowable asphalt shingle compound product in roadways. So there's recycling firms out there that will actually accept these torn off shingles, and they'll grind them up and they'll actually include them into the roadway construction. So now some counties or some provinces have more strict regiments, but generally speaking, it's upwards of between 5 and 15% of that road construction can be made up of recycled roofing content. So there's a nice recycling aspect there where the life of the product continues.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, you talked about improper installation, and I mean, what does that mean? What do you see? What do you see in terms of roofs being improperly installed and not functioning the way that they're designed to function?
So Within Canada, and we'll speak specific to Canada, and I know this is as well a problem in the U.S., but primarily it's nailing, and you know, every manufacturer has installation instructions to follow, and we go as far as actually putting it on the wrapper, not just online, on the wrapper itself, and there's actually pictures there as well. So we do have a lot of different folks out there that maybe don't speak English, maybe they speak Spanish, maybe they speak another language. So we have to put pictures to make it easier for everybody. So those pictures and those instructions identify where the nails should be. And that's a requirement for the product to perform properly. So improper application traditionally is high nailing. So above what we would call the laminate area or the spine of the shingle, where both pieces of the laminate shingle actually come together. It's the strongest point of the shingle, and that's why we're asking for it to be nailed there. So when they nail high of that, it doesn't allow the product to perform properly over time. And it may initially perform the way it's supposed to for the, you know, the first 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, but inevitably, and that's what we were talking about even with the FORTIFIED program there, is inevitably, because it's not been installed correctly, it will fail.
So that brings up the question of aging too. Have you done any work into the area of aging and how the impact resilience may start to ebb as the roof gets older?
That is an excellent question that unfortunately I can't answer. Mark, do you have any feedback on that?
I don't have any test data that I can recall or cite. That's another question we could get back to you on, but I don't have that. I can't respond to that today.
So,
this is Tanya. I can jump in for a second. We're looking into that at IBHS. We just started testing our five-year-old roofs last year, and we're just working through the analysis of data now. So we don't know the answer yet, but we're heading that direction.
Excellent. So I think there's one more question in the Q&A, and I think after that we'll wrap it up.
So the question is, since installation is a main factor in terms of roofing durability, what has been performed so far? I'm not sure about the performed so far part of it, but what I can speak to is manufacturers, including ICO, have recognized that installation challenges in the field are an issue. And so we continue to develop products that are easier to install. We continue to, you know, add installation instructions, like I said before, and pictures right onto the wrappers to make it easier for the contractors to be able to install the product properly. A step further that I know ICO does is we're heavily engaged with the contractor community. And the reason for that is to ensure that folks understand why product needs to be applied properly and what the effects are if it's not installed properly. And we've got training facilities across Canada, and I believe some across the US as well, where we'll host some of these seminars with contractors. And we also have videos on our website and our YouTube channel that help educate contractors in proper installation of not just asphalt shingles, but the flashings, the ice and water products, things like that. So very important aspect to the performance of the product. We recognize it, and as a manufacturer, it's our responsibility to help with some of that training for sure.
Great. Well, I think that's it. We'll wrap it up for today. I really want to thank you, Vince and Mark, for an excellent presentation. We will put this presentation, the replay, on our YouTube channel probably early next week. The slides will be available on our website also early next week. Thanks again to both of you. Much appreciated. And thanks to everybody for attending, and keep an eye on your inbox for the notification for our next Friday Forum. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.